Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into, well, your world, really. That always fascinating and sometimes kind of frantic world of parenting. You've been feeding your brain with some really interesting stuff lately.
A blend of the practical and the philosophical, it seems like.
Exactly. On one hand, we've got all these insights from this child development expert tackling those everyday parenting questions like, are we doing enough? Are we doing too much? You know the drill.
Oh, absolutely.
And then on the other hand, you've been digging into Stoicism,
Yes.
this like ancient philosophy that you wouldn't think would be relevant, but it might just hold some surprisingly relevant wisdom for raising kids today.
That's right. It's all about finding those unexpected connections.
Right. That's what we're here for. Today's mission. Can we take these seemingly totally different sources, totally different worlds, and pull out some actually valuable insights for parents like you? Let's find out.
Let's dive in.
Now, this child development interview, it starts with a question I think we've all asked ourselves at some point. Are we doing enough to boost our kids' intelligence, especially in those first few years? I mean, we've all heard about how crucial those early years are.
Right. That whole make or break idea, it can make parents feel like they need to be like signing their kids up for Mandarin lessons at 3 months old.
Yeah.
But what I find refreshing here is the emphasis on holistic development.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that term a little. What does holistic development actually mean when we're talking about kids, about their brains, about their development?
It's about recognizing that a child's brain, much like a house, needs a strong foundation before you can start adding on like those fancy second-story additions.
Oh, I love a good analogy. So, walk us through this brain as a house idea.
Okay, so picture this. The foundation of the house, that's a primitive brain. It's all about survival instincts. Hunger, sleep, safety, those basic needs, they have to be met first.
Makes sense. You can't really build on like an unstable foundation.
Exactly.
Mm.
Then comes the emotional brain. Think of it like the walls of the house. This is where a child develops feelings, social connections, and learns to regulate their emotions. You know, that whole use your words thing.
Right, right. And this is where creating a safe, emotionally nurturing environment for our kids really comes in, right?
Precisely. It's about giving your child a sense of security and belonging. Only then can you build a sturdy roof. And that roof, that's the intellectual brain, which is responsible for higher level thinking, problem solving, all that good stuff.
Wow, okay. That analogy really brings it all together. So instead of stressing about flashcards and early academics, maybe the real focus for those early years should be on making sure our kids feel safe, loved, and emotionally secure.
That's the key takeaway here. Because without that strong emotional foundation, any intellectual growth, it might be shaky at best. It's like building that second story on a foundation of sand. It's just not going to be as strong.
And that's something I think all parents can relate to, no matter what their parenting style is. Like, that's universal.
Absolutely. This idea of building from the ground up, meeting those basic needs, fostering emotional security first, that's universal.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes slowing down and focusing on those basic needs is the best thing we can do for our kids' development.
It is. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Because there's more. I mean, this interview does not shy away from the tough stuff.
And this is where that Stoic philosophy might come in handy. But more on that in a bit.
You know, speaking of slowing down and focusing on the basics, one thing this expert talks about that really resonates with me is this whole punishment versus discipline thing.
Mm-hmm.
She admits to like sometimes defaulting to punishments, especially when she's feeling stressed.
Wow.
You know, the patience is wearing thin.
Right.
And honestly, who hasn't been there?
Totally. Totally. Every parent.
But what I found fascinating is how she talks about why punishments often backfire. Like she actually dives into the neuroscience behind it,
Yeah, it's really interesting.
explaining how punishments can actually trigger like the fear response in a child's brain.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, neuroscience, break that down for me. I need a crash course here.
Basically, when a child is punished, especially harshly or inconsistently, their brain goes into like fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Right.
Right, like survival mode.
Yeah.
And when a kid's brain is stuck in that survival mode, they're not exactly primed for learning or like absorbing those life lessons we're trying to teach them.
That makes so much sense. It's like their brain is too busy feeling threatened to actually process what they did wrong and how to do better next time.
Exactly. And it's not just about that immediate reaction. This expert argues that, like, repeated reliance on punishment, it can actually hinder a child's long-term emotional development.
Oh, wow.
They might become more focused on avoiding getting in trouble, than on developing their own internal compass of right and wrong.
So if punishments aren't the answer, then what is? Because let's be real, sometimes kids need those boundaries.
They absolutely do, and this is where I think the expert's approach aligns so well with those Stoic principles you're curious about.
Mm.
It's about shifting from punishment to what she calls proactive limit setting.
Proactive limit setting. Okay, I like the sound of that. What does that look like in action?
It's about establishing those clear expectations before things escalate,
Mhm.
before it turns into a meltdown.
Right.
Think of it like this. You're setting those house rules so that everyone knows what game they're playing.
Right.
And it can be as simple as, in our family, we use kind words even when we're angry, or setting really clear limits around screen time, things like that.
So it's about setting those boundaries early on and making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And when those limits are crossed, the focus shifts from punishment to helping the child really understand the why behind the rule.
Okay.
And the expert shared this great anecdote about her own kids constantly arguing over who got to choose the TV show, driving her crazy.
The worst.
So she sat them down and explained that, look, the TV, it's meant to be a source of enjoyment, not arguments,
Right, right.
right? And then she empowered them to come up with a solution together.
Okay, I love that she involved them in the process. So did they actually manage to agree on something?
They did. They decided that if they couldn't agree on a show without arguing, the TV would be turned off. And the key here is that it was their solution.
Right.
So they were more invested in making it work.
That's brilliant. You know, this whole idea of setting those firm but loving limits, it reminds me of that Stoicism podcast and its emphasis on self-control. Could setting those boundaries for our kids also be a way to help them develop self-discipline?
Absolutely. Stoicism is all about recognizing that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we can control our reactions.
Right.
And parenting within clear boundaries, it's like providing those training wheels for self-control.
So it's less about controlling the child and more about creating a controlled environment where they can kind of learn and grow.
Exactly. And speaking of creating an environment that encourages growth, this next part of the interview about saying no is where things get really interesting.
Okay, the power of no. I'll admit, this is a tough one for me. As parents, isn't our instinct to jump in and help our kids whenever we can, shield them from disappointment or frustration, make life a little easier for them where we can?
It's totally natural to want to smooth the path for our kids.
Mhm.
But this expert makes a really compelling case for why saying no, even when it's hard, can actually be like a gift to them.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does saying no actually benefit our kids? In what way is it a gift?
It goes back to that idea of personal responsibility that's so central to Stoicism. Remember, Stoicism is all about recognizing what's within our control and what isn't, and just focusing our energy there. When we constantly swoop in and rescue our kids from every little mishap, we're kind of inadvertently sending the message that they're not actually capable of handling things on their own.
So by letting them struggle a bit, we're actually helping them build that resilience, that resourcefulness. They need to figure things out on their own.
Precisely. It's like that old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. By allowing our kids to navigate challenges, make mistakes, even just experience those natural consequences of their choices, we're giving them the tools to become more independent and self-reliant.
It's like we're saying, I trust you to figure this out, which is a really powerful message when you think about it.
It is, and the expert actually brings up a really interesting cultural comparison here. She talks about Scandinavian parenting and how it embraces this idea of giving children a surprising amount of autonomy from a young age.
Okay, yeah, I've heard a little about this. Tell me more, because this is fascinating to me.
So in Scandinavian countries, it's not uncommon to see young children walking to school alone, helping out with household chores, even having a say in what they eat or wear.
Now, before people start picturing toddlers just wandering the streets unsupervised, there are obviously still boundaries and safety measures in place, right?
Absolutely. It's not about throwing all caution to the wind. It's about striking a balance, right, between giving kids that freedom to explore their independence, but within a framework of clear limits and expectations.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Do you have any specific examples of what this looks like in practice?
Sure, so imagine this. It's a chilly morning, and your 5-year-old, they insist on wearing shorts to school. Now, a lot of us would probably put up a fight, right? Honey, no, you got to wear pants, it's cold.
Right.
But in a Scandinavian household, the approach might be to let the child actually experience the natural consequence of that choice, which is, feeling cold.
And then hopefully learning from it for next time.
Exactly. And the beauty of this approach is that it not only fosters that independence, but it teaches those kids those valuable problem-solving skills.
Right. They learn to think ahead,
Yes.
anticipate consequences,
Exactly.
make adjustments as needed.
Yes,
I
exactly.
love that. It's about empowering them to be like active participants in their own lives rather than these passive recipients of our instructions.
And that kind of empowerment, that's a gift that will serve them well throughout their lives.
As we're talking about all of this, it occurs to me that so much of this comes down to shifting our own mindset as parents, right? It's about letting go of that need to control everything,
Hmm.
to be that perfect parent, and instead kind of embracing the messy, the unpredictable, but ultimately the incredibly rewarding journey of raising, resilient, capable little humans.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's where I think the real wisdom of Stoicism shines through. It's not about having all the answers or doing everything right. It's about approaching parenthood and, honestly, life in general, with a sense of acceptance, intentionality, and a whole lot of self-compassion.
And on that note, I think we've given our listener a lot to ponder today, a lot to think about.
Food for thought, indeed.
If there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive with us today, it's this. Maybe, just maybe, the greatest gift we can give our children isn't a life that's free from challenges, but the tools and that inner strength to navigate those challenges with courage, with resilience, and a healthy dose of self-awareness. And maybe, just maybe, those tools can be found in the most unexpected of places, like the teachings of ancient philosophers or, the parenting practices of cultures that are vastly different from our own. So keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and we'll keep taking these deep dives together.
Until next time.